front line of policing is loud, but the voices behind it, they're a lot louder and I think, frankly, a lot more interesting. Hi, I'm Bob Plaschke, and this is First Response. This is the #1 podcast that takes you behind the badge and uncovers real stories and experiences of first responders from all walks of life and the topics that shape public safety today. If you're curious about the guy or the gal behind the hero, and they are indeed truly heroes, and the topics that they care about, take a listen. This is kind of your front row seat to hearing some of the really interesting voices out there, and more importantly, the heroes. This podcast is sponsored by Pepperball, where I have the honor to serve as CEO. Pepperball creates non-lethal alternatives to guns police use to keep themselves and the public safe. Today, I'm super excited. I have with me Lieutenant Frank Borelli. And Lieutenant Frank Borelli is retired, but is one of the most credentialed voices in law enforcement media today. Think of him as the Walter Cronkite. Maybe that dates me. Think of him as the oh, goodness gracious. Frank, who should we use as your name?
Walter Cronkite's just fine. I mean, I remember him. And but who was the guy whose tagline was, "And that's the way it is," or whatever? Was that him, or was that somebody else?
I think that might be him. You'll be I was going to say Bob Costas, but that'd be inappropriate. You're the Hannah Guthrie. No, that would be
more contemporary. Yeah. How about Bob Euchre? Can I be Bob Euchre?
You can be Bob Euchre.
There we go.
So Frank, he spent 40 years in uniform, was a military police officer in the U.S. Army, and then transitioned into a number of roles in policing in Maryland, where he currently lives, and started back almost 20 plus years ago in being the executive director of the Officer Media Group and the Officer Magazine, which is one of the most widely read law enforcement trade publications in the country. We advertise in it as an example. And he hosts and co-hosts a number of different podcasts, the lineup, which I listen to, and you should listen to. It's fantastic. And a number of other things that we'll hopefully talk about today. Anyway, I'm super excited to have the LT on the show. And Frank, can I call you Frank?
You can call me Frank. You can call me LT. I have been called everything on the street in languages I didn't even understand. So feel free.
The first question for me out of the box is what got you starting to do this work at Officer Media Group? Why tell stories about police officers? What motivated you? I know what motivates me, but what motivated you to start doing this kind of education, so to speak?
It's kind of interesting. On the personal note, as a young child, it was a matter of record. So I'm an adopted kid, and I wasn't adopted until I was 4.5. And apparently, and this is on court record, when the judge asked me if I was going to be a lawyer like my dad when I grew up, I made the statement, "No, I'm going to be a police officer and actually help people." The implication being lawyers don't. But I wanted to be a police officer all my life. I wanted to be a police trainer, and then I always was driven to write. So it became kind of a unique merging. I became a police officer, like I said, in the Army. Then I got out, became a police officer in the civilian world. I became a police instructor at the grand old age of 24. And then I started writing about a lot of fiction that never went anywhere, but actually for the industry in the late 90s. And that fed me into balancing police work, training, SWAT work, and writing. And then I got this job with Officer, and I've been here about 18 years now as the editorial director. I'm the academy director for our online virtual academy, Officer Virtual Academy. And I'm the face, if you will, of the lineup and officer.com. And it's an honor to do it. I think my biggest motivation is for people to understand that cops are human. We get vilified all too often as cops, and we get ignored as humans, and that matters to me.
Why do you think the public does that? Is that because what
police officers do or cops do is it kind of I don't know, contentious, scary. They give out tickets, they arrest. I mean, you would think, and has that changed over your career?
So, what's changed over my career, honestly, is the way people teach their children about law enforcement and what the mainstream media does with law enforcement. Mainstream media has always made a dollar by hyper sensationalizing things. Let's recognize that if we tell you something horrendous and it makes you want to watch TV more, then our ads get shown more, they become of greater value, we can charge higher ad revenue, we make more money by hyper sensationalizing things. But I remember being taught as a kid that if I was lost, if I was hurt, if I had a problem, I was scared, find the guy in the blue uniform, he'll help you out. I can't tell you, as one of my biggest pet peeves, how many times I would have a parent that would look at their child, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. If you don't behave, I'm going to have that police officer arrest you. And all they're doing is teaching their kid to be afraid of the police. I got down on my knees a lot of time and said, hey, I understand where your parents are coming from and you need to behave for your folks, but you don't need to be afraid of me. I wish I could take them to jail and get you ice cream, but I can't do that. Right. Didn't actually say that to the kids. That's what I was thinking. But it's how we view police in general has definitely changed. And it's become quite the political topic. If you think about it, it changes with every presidential administration. Are the cops good? Are the cops evil? Is crime going to go up? Is crime going to go down? How much money is available in grant funding? Changes, president to president. And it's kind of a shame to me. I feel like if you have people sacrificing to serve, it shouldn't be politicized. It should just be appreciated.
Well, and it's part of the reason we do, at least I started first response, is that the questions when I became the CEO of Pepper Paul and told people what I did, you had a bunch of misconceptions that would come from the folks that I deal with on my personal and business life, people that are not part of the policing industry, so to speak, and the misconceptions were, to your point, media driven, and not to cast the media as the bad guy, but it's this notion of taking the one bad apple and the one example and associating that to the entire profession and losing sight of what 99.99% of police officers do, which is a heroic, quiet daily mission to keep us safe.
And that's what really gets me is you see one guy who does something incorrect, whether it's evil. I mean, and there are evil people in the world, and I hate to say some of them do end up in uniform, but we're all human. But whether a police officer makes a legit mistake, whether something goes sideways and he can't control it, whether it is horrendous and understandable, sometimes it's just a lesser of two evils. But then the media gets a hold of it, and I'll give you, without going one way or another, George Floyd. There is an hour and a half of video available around that incident. But how much did we see on mainstream TV? 30 seconds, maybe. On the scene of that, there was a Caucasian officer, an Asian officer, a Hispanic officer, and an African-American officer. And all we ever heard about was the Caucasian officer and other officers. You can't get more diversity in a response team. But the information's manipulated. And I hate to see that. I think that vilifies law enforcement unnecessarily. It causes trust issues, which creates bigger problems. And so here's what I'm saying: whoever wants to listen, take the police officer in front of you at face value for the way they're treating you. If I walk up to your car on a traffic stop and I say, "Good afternoon, I'm Lieutenant Borelli. I need to see your license and registration, please." I have been courteous while I'm doing my job. You might hate the fact that you got pulled over. You might be running late for work. Your wife might be in the hospital delivering a baby. You might want to tell me to go pound sand. If you give me grief back, then we're going to go this way. If you give me courtesy back, you're probably going to be on your way pretty quick. Don't assume the police officers are bad.
And secondarily, by implication, assume that they're just like you, right? To the point, if you're well treated, if you're treated with respect, you're gonna respond in kind. And if you're yelled at or vilified, or if you're inappropriately or what's the right word? You're accused of being something without that being the case, you're gonna have a different response.
Yeah. And we talk about what's changed across the years. It's something too. And you and I are of a generation where we were taught to give everybody common courtesy. Respect was earned, but everybody got common courtesy. At least that's how I was raised. I look at the generation two behind me, my grandchildren's generation now, and they are in general being taught, and I'm not going to blame schools because it happens at home as much as it happens in schools, that they are due respect and they better demand it. That there is never, ever any, and the difference is nobody teaches them there's a difference between courtesy and respect. I can say, good morning, sir, and that's courtesy. If I hold the door for you, that's courtesy. How I view you as an individual and how much weight I give your outlook and your words, that's respect. And these kids expect that everything that they have some kind of magic about them that demands everybody just give them unlimited respect no matter what. And if we don't, then we're wrong and they can vilify us for that.
That's a great way of articulating the kind of the pendulum swing that's gone. It maybe, at least in my mind, a bit too far to that point, because then you effectively you create the precondition for conflict, because in effect, and particularly because police officers typically they aren't pulling people over for just to say hello.
No. No, that's one of the big things, people out here. Oh, so I had a conversation. I'll tell you a real quick personal story. I'm a cigar guy. I've seen a local cigar shop. The owner is a Caucasian man married to an African-American woman. He grew up in the inner city of Baltimore. I was obviously retired. I'm in, simple clothes, like probably that time of year, a Hawaiian shirt and shorts. I still had a gun on. I mean, I'm retired officer. I usually don't leave home without it. But it wasn't visible. It was concealed. There was another gentleman sitting there who made the statement that he believed all white police officers left their house trying to figure it out how they could get away with killing somebody that day, without knowing that I was a police officer. He had no idea. And so the owner was like, hey, do you know this? Do you know that? You really believe this? You really believe that? He goes, well, let me introduce you to Frank. He's a white police officer sitting here with a gun on, and you've been interacting with him, and there hasn't been any, conflict. There's no aggression.
Correct.
Does this change your outlook? And the guy didn't even want to say, oh, I'm sorry, you're right. And it's kind of funny. It's another thing. I don't know if you've heard this a lot. Instead of just saying, okay, you're right. I'm admitting maybe I'm not 100% correct. You're right. What I hear a lot now is, well, you're not wrong. But that means we can still debate it, right? Anyway, it is amazing to see the different viewpoint people have on police officers. And I trust some of it's based on their experience. I pulled over a little old lady who, God help her, her tags were expired. And I don't know who's driving the car until I walk. I mean, my ears, till I walked up to the car. And it wonderful little, I walk up to the car. She's just in tears. I'm like, ma'am, what's wrong? Out here, I think I stopped her. And she says, I've never been pulled over before. This lady was in her early 80s and still driving, right. Never been pulled over before. I said, well, I'm sorry. She goes, why did you pull me over? I said, well, your tags are expired. She goes, and she stops crying. Oh, no. The sticker's in my glove compartment. I just forgot to put it on my car. I'm like, well, hand it here and I'll put it on your car. And she was more amazed by the fact that I wasn't going to write her a ticket, that I was going to take the sticker and clean off her license plate and put the sticker on her license plate for her. And she's like, you would do that? Like,
of course.
Well, yeah, I'm a public servant. Let's get this squared away, and then you don't get pulled over again. Started out crying, and by the time she left, she wanted my number, so you sent me a Christmas card. But it's that kind of interaction that can really change a day.
Well, and again, it's police officers are brothers, fathers, mothers, sisters, grandmothers, granddaughters. It's a million folks who've just decided to swear an oath to a constitution and to serve the public. It is nothing more or less. And so in that, I should say it's nothing less. It's a hell of a commitment to put your life on the line to protect, but just normal next door neighbors who, to your point, serve and just simply want to be treated reasonably in the process of protecting you.
Just one common courtesy. Like I said, same thing I give, right? I walk up, I issue you a greeting, I give you my name. All I want is courtesy back, and we go from there. If you're going to throw out a string of curse words and call me names, I've had it done in languages I don't understand. Why would you think at that point I'm going to continue to be courtesy? I mean, if you want to flip that switch, we go for the bitch ride. I've got no problem with that.
Well, and I think that's and again, as I try to explain to my friends and hopefully folks who listen to this podcast, is that how would you personally respond if someone aggressively attacked you with name calling and accusations? You would respond as a normal human would respond. It's difficult to find common ground, and it's difficult to find and that's why I give police officers tremendous credit for managing their temperament in view of these very difficult situations. I appreciate you're getting the person on their worst day when you're pulling them over or when you're arresting them. That is a truth, but the police officer didn't create the crime. The police officer didn't do the deed. They're just there to manage it.
And it is kind of a shame. We do deal with people on the worst day, and it's something to think about. Okay, I'm pulling you over or I'm arresting you. But how about on the days where I've got to hold a wife whose husband's been murdered or died in a car wreck, or I've got to go make notification that somebody's grandparents died, or there's on the other side of that, and those are the worst days, right? I delivered 2 kids while I was on the street. I delivered 2 babies. How do you, when I had a carpenter once ask me, he says, at the end of the day, I do my work. I look and I see what I accomplished. He goes, how do you know what you accomplished in a day? And I said, I don't. I never have any idea how many crimes I prevented because I came around the corner at the right time. I have no idea how many people's day I improved just by giving them a smile or a wave or a good morning to the baby, whatever. But here's what I know in 40 years. The average carpenter never delivered a kid. I delivered 2 babies as part of my job. The average carpenter never actively saved a life. I kept 4 people from coding out actively, and that's solid. That's defined. If all I can say about my 40-year career is I saved 6 lives or brought 2 in the world, saved 4, it was worth it. I mean, okay, cool. It was good.
There are 6 there are 6 people out there, and I mean, and there's countless more that you personally and each officer personally affects in the work that you do, that are eternally grateful for what you did. Whether
reality is they've probably forgotten me, and the babies probably don't even know who the heck I was, but that doesn't matter. I try to think of it in terms of, do I have to answer to St. Peter at the pearly gates?
Now, amen. Now, one of the things that transparently we talked about before we started the podcast was what we were going to talk about today, and you had suggested, which I loved, was that not only is the police officer affected by all of this, their wives, their spouses, their girlfriends, their boyfriends, their children are all affected by this. On the positive, which is, I'm sure it was, going home and telling your girlfriend or your spouse that you delivered a baby. That was a good day. And then all the stories that you couldn't go home and share, all when you had a bad day, when you weren't going to share all the horrible stories that you didn't share. So let's talk about that. I've really never talked with a police officer a lot about their personal life and how that works. Do police officers share a lot of the details with their spouses, or is it, I assume it's situationally, like each person's different, I guess?
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, it really depends on the relationship. And unfortunately, the side effect of me being me is I've been married and divorced twice.
Yep.
The significant other that I have now, if I was coming home from working the street, I wouldn't keep anything back. I would share 100% of everything. It's just the basis of the relationship that we have. With both of my ex-wives, there was a lot that got held back, and it stemmed from my belief of whether or not they could emotionally handle what was going on. Coming home late from a shift and taking the phone. Remember, we used to have phones that actually connected to the wall.
Yeah.
But if you were really high up, if you were falutin fancy, you could get the cordless one that could go on the other side of the bed. right? So I would grab the phone and put it on the other side of the bed, and my ex-wife woke up enough to go, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I don't want the phone. If it rings, I want to be able to answer it." "Well, are we waiting on a phone call?" "Yeah, I had an incident tonight. Guy's in the hospital being monitored. Don't know if he's going to live or die. I'm waiting on a phone call." How do you explain that to somebody? It's not. It's so. But here's the thing, and you're right. We did. To me, it's phenomenal that we don't train officers enough, no matter the gender, right? We're talking about spousal, significant others. It doesn't matter if it's same gender, opposite, doesn't matter. We're talking about the significant other you have. When you're only dating, then absence doesn't matter, right? If I'm going to ask you out to dinner on Friday night and it's Tuesday, then you don't care what happens between now and Friday night, as long as I show up to pick you up at the time I said I was going to show up to pick you up Friday night.
Yeah.
But if this relationship gets serious and we're living together and I'm supposed to be home for dinner Friday night and I'm a half hour late, if you haven't heard from me, then that half hour can become a source of stress. Worry can creep in. And when that half hour becomes 6 hours, I had an incident at one point where I was working a 3 to 11 shift, and a Kentucky Fried Chicken got robbed at about 10:15 that night. And I ended up on a perimeter position till 3:30 in the morning. And I couldn't call home. There was no way to do it. And by the time I got home, the wife at the time was losing her mind. She was like, "It's been 4.5 hours. Nobody knew who you were, and I didn't know who to call." And there's a heavier impact. And honestly, policing is a lifestyle, right? I mean, we just had this conversation. I've sat at a cigar shop with a gun on, I'm retired, but if I'm an active duty officer and I've got a gun on off duty, it's a good chance I got handcuffs too. Am I really off duty? Well, not if I'm in my jurisdiction, not if there's an emergency that covers it. And it's one of the running jokes. When I go to a restaurant now with my significant other, she knows I'm going to a corner and I'm sitting with my back to a wall.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, and this is military as well. Where's my primary exits, my tertiary exits? Can I see the threats coming? Blah, blah, blah. One of the biggest arguments I get in is when I go out with a buddy of mine who's a cop and we go into a place and one of us is going to have to sit with our back to the door.
How do you decide that, by the way? Do you get
but the guy I'm talking about specifically, we don't worry about it. Like, dude, if I see you yanking your gun, I'll get out of the way. We got it. Like, it's a mutual thing, right? If I'm grabbing, you go down. If you're grabbing, I'm going. We're just getting out of the way. But it's and it's kind of funny. My youngest son, we were at a place down in Louisiana. He went to college down there, and he took me to lunch one day. This place he'd been bragging about, and we go in, and we're going to the back corner, and he knows it, and he sits with his back to the wall and looks at me, and I'm like, "Dude, you know better." He goes, "Get over it. Have a seat." I'm already sitting down, and I'm like,
"Yep,
okay, I can, I gotta accept that." But it is truly a lifestyle that impacts families, and that doesn't slap you in the face any more realistically. I mean, Police Week just happened in May. This is, beginning of June as we record this, May, and it's sad to me that Police Week always starts on Mother's Day, because they're mothers who don't have their kids around or their spouses around because they died in the line of duty. And here we're going to launch Police Week on Mother's Day. But you go to the memorial in DC and watch the spouses, the widows, the widowers, watch them walking around with their kids, watch the family members. I took my son down there one time to the candlelight vigil, and afterward I said, "What do you think?" He goes, "I don't ever want to do this again. That's a gut punch." He's like, it's
as sad
I'm
as
glad I did it, but I don't ever want to do it again. And I like, yeah, I mean, it's there's a reality there, but it's a heavy impact on the family. And to me, the biggest disservice we do is we don't talk about that enough in the academies, or at least we didn't when I was going through and when I was still teaching and actively in the academy. We talk about stress management. We talk about support systems. We talk about priests and avoiding the bartender. And, we talk about your spouse if they can help you. And your family ought to be a support system for you. And if you can't take joy out of that, then they're really not being that much support. And that's not their fault. Are you letting them? Are you sharing with them? Are you telling them? Do we want to protect them from some things? Yeah, They don't really want to know we got shot at or the vest stopped the bullet. But do they need to know that? Yeah, that's what they signed up for. Why would we hide from them the ugly side of the profession? They chose us. They need to get 100% of it.
Yeah, although I think to be fair, they chose you, not the profession. Now they understand the profession comes along with it, but I can't imagine anyone, unless they came from that world, unless their father was or mother was a police officer, that they would have any sense or any idea of what it is that you face.
It's interesting because, I mean, like I said, been divorced twice, 2 ex-wives. My first marriage, I was not a police officer when I got married. And then I went through the academy and everything was fine until we got pregnant. And then all of a sudden I couldn't be a cop anymore because from her perspective, because too much risk and family, and you can't leave me to do this by myself. And I was already a cop when I got married the second time. And she was like, okay, this is just who you are. It's just part of it.
Right.
And honestly, I wore a badge 40 years out of, and then for all the people who don't think I look 80, I'm only 62. But that's 2/3 of my life. No matter whether it's who you are, not who you are, the habits and the lifestyle change who you are after even just a 20-year career. It's going to be, they're permanent habits you never lose that impact your family.
Well, and to your point, as an example, always being aware and never being truly comfortable. I mean, I think that's what I always notice with police officers, either on the job or retired, is that particularly or explicitly in public, they're never particularly fully relaxed. They're just always aware. To your point, that situational awareness is built in, and they're, I always tell a story about walking down the Mardi Gras with a fire chief and a police chief. The fire chief, and I was in the middle. The fire chief and I had a great conversation. The police, this is retired police chief. He was, he could barely hold the conversation because it was way too much threats as we were walking down down Bourbon Street. It was just far too much stimulation, far too much of I don't know I guess threat's the right word for it. Far too much for him to take in and be aware of.
We call that head on a swivel, looking for work. And you just always, where's the threat coming from? 80% of the data we get to make decisions with comes to us through our eyes. So we are constantly, aware. You're right, and it can drive our partners nuts.
And I was at Police Week, and I was at the memorial on the U.S. Capitol, and it was horrific to see to your point, it was gut punch after gut punch for 154 fallen officers, to see those families come through, and to see the small children. That can't be, you got to be empathetic or sympathetic to a spouse who says, "How do we raise a family, given that that I could be a widow or I could be, alone raising the child?" That is a reasonable threat every day.
Well, and you have to find a way to work with that. I mean, you have to recognize the reality. You have to have the discussion. You have to have the open communication. But at the end of the day, and I don't have an answer. Everybody does it a different way, right? Your spouse has to have faith in the fact that you're going to come home. And this is where, but before we started recording this, we talked about the show Blue Bloods, and now there's Boston Blue. And I wished I had a family where I could go lean on the cops that have been there before me and done all that. And I had plenty of police officers in my life. My father was the lawyer who became a district court judge, and I knew cops that were friends that, I was the kid that would wake up at 3 a.m. when the door knocked and there was a detective wanting my dad to sign a warrant because he was the on-call judge. That saw that lifestyle. But the first shooting I was in, I couldn't go to my dad for advice. I couldn't go to my dad and say, how do I deal with this feeling? Or how do I cope with that? My dad was going to look, and my dad didn't know anything about guns, number one. And number two, he'd look at me and be like, well, it's your job. Get over it. It's just, you have a drink, you're fine.
Which obviously, and then to expect the spouses to, that just takes it to the next level, because if It's hard enough for the police officer who has, I guess, some perception of control over themselves, right, and the risks they face. That you have these spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, these partners, as you would say, they have no control, and they are the recipient of either a very few good days, a lot of bad days, and potentially a horrible day, right? I mean, I think that's the general.
Yeah. But, I think ultimately it comes down to faith, right? And the person you're with. And I'll give you a perfect example. I know a couple, husband and wife, husband's police officer. Now he's retired. This was going years back. She was a dispatcher. He worked for a municipality, and she was a dispatcher for the county. Yep. Part-time, she would work as a dispatcher for that same municipality. And in Maryland, we have, or at least in the county I worked in, we had something called Signal 13. I'm in trouble. I'm a police officer. I'm in trouble. I hit the magic button on my radio that lights up the dispatcher's panel and says, "Hey, I'm getting my ass kicked. Send me the world." It has my ID number. She knows where I am. That happened to this police officer while his spouse was the dispatcher.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And she handled it phenomenally. She was 100% professional. She kept all of her emotions locked down until everything was fine. The call had been cleared. She knew her husband was okay. Then she got relieved from the console so she could go fall apart. And the funny thing was, he was the one who had been in the fight. He was the one somebody was trying to kill. He was the one who literally fought for his life and had to get this guy into handcuffs and then take him to the hospital before he took him to jail. But when he got home, she was the one that needed the most comfort.
Well, it's actually
both 100%, but every relationship dynamic's different. I know a couple. Husband's a county police officer, wife's a park police officer, and different settings for the same job, effectively. And they have that 100% open. This is what's going on. This is how things are, and there's nothing they don't talk about.
I have noticed in that context, by the way, that of a lot of the folks that I've, the police officers that I've gotten to know on a more personal basis, and the ones that have the second marriage, is that the second marriage, it is typically with someone who is in the business, in quotes, in some shape or form, because whether maybe they were in the army or in the military, they had some notion of context, because it kind of makes sense that it's hard for someone who doesn't have that context, like a nurse, as an example, someone who deals with what I would call trauma. No, you're going to tell me your first wife was a nurse.
No way. Both of them actually. Anyway, no, I laugh because one of the largest divorce rates when I was going through the academy in the 80s, the largest divorce rate were cops married to nurses.
Oh, really?
And they seem to come together like just magnets. But that was one of the greatest divorce rates. When you think about it, both of them were working shift work. Both of them had schedules. Both of them, they couldn't make plans. They couldn't do this. And it just was a zoo. But I don't know. It'd be an interesting study to see how many second marriages for police officers are actually to other people that are familiar with the demands of a uniform. That might be interesting. I tell you, one thing that's been a study that's been done is there are families, and we talk about families that do the work. There have been genetic markers now found that show higher rates of what they call cardiac elasticity, a higher stress threshold, effectively. So these families that do the work don't have the post-traumatic stress injuries. They don't have the trauma care. They don't have they just do the work. They understand the outlooks. They lean on each other. But whatever it is, these genetic markers make it so that they don't have the physical impacts of the job as bad. And it runs in family lines.
Oh, that's interesting. That it's kind of it's the blue bloods in a very, in a very pragmatic and helpful construct that you're genetically better able to deal with the demands, and therefore you can recommend it to your son and into your grandson to the blue bloods construct. Are there any programs, or I mean, back to this notion of agencies providing training for the officer? Are there any I've not heard of any formalized programs about how to deal with your spouse and how to deal with your children. Is that it's all just kind of in the air? It's kind of
Well, I mean, I imagine as part of now they've expanded stress management training and stress inoculation training, and I imagine that's at least discussed. But I think, I mean, in my world, I could almost see, support groups, not necessarily for the officers, and even for the officers still alive on the job, but for the spouses that just need somebody else that can relate to exactly what they're going through, exactly what they've done, that can sympathize, that can offer words of guidance or advice or whatever. I mean, the kids, they play off their parents' emotions and what the setting is and the tone in the house, if you will. But it's just something I don't think we've taught enough. I think that we need to teach the police officers to consider the spousal perspective, right? And we need to make sure the spouses understand the police officer's perspective. And if there's an imbalance, if there's something that doesn't mesh, then that's got to be worked out. Otherwise, that's that nail in the coffin that it just starts a downhill spiral.
Well, and I think it's so important because, all of us have, I speak for myself in terms of the role I have. I travel a lot. I'm away from home. I'm working odd hours. It creates a lot of stress for my wife and for my kids. Yeah. And my job is not stressful in the context of a police officer. On a scale of a 1 to 10, mine's a 1, and an officer's is an 11. So, if I'm thinking about it and trying to manage it, the nature of the job and the nature of the, you cannot be distracted as a police officer, right? I mean, you have to, that puts your own life in jeopardy if you come with a difficult home life, right? That's not a good thing.
Well, and hopefully you have the sense to take the day off, right? If you're having that kind of day and you can't focus, and I've been there, done that. I've gone into my sergeant and said, hey, look, my head's not in the game today. I'm going to get myself hurt or somebody else hurt. I need to take a mental health day. And if he had sense at the time and he did, he went, cool, go home, get out of here. Or there was times where he went, I can't afford to not have you here. What do you need from me to get your head straight? You go either way.
Well, Frank, I got two last questions. Looking back, if you had advice or perspective to the spouses, to the partners of police officers, looking back over your 40 years, what advice, what perspectives would you share with them thinking about, getting into a relationship? Is it even worthwhile getting into the relationship given the challenges it brings, or what advice or perspective would you share with those folks?
I think that I would say that 100% open communication has to be there. Have the hard conversations. Have the conversations about expectations. Make sure the person you're thinking about having as a spouse understands how odd the hours can be, how the communication can be completely, sorry, you're just going to have to take it on faith. I'm coming home. Here's what, you got to look at them and go, here's what's going to be bad. When two guys show up at the front door to knock and one's wearing a cross and the other one's not, then something went sideways. Until that happens, if the phone rings. So what? At worst case scenario, I'm in the hospital, but I'm alive. Until somebody knocks on the door, it's okay. We'll get past it, but you've got to have those hard conversations. What's going to scare you? What can I do to help you avoid those fears? I mean, both people have to say, this is what really is drawing a line for me. This is where I need to be honest. This is where you might not want to hear this, but this is what you got to hear. You have to have that open communication, I think, to make it work.
Yeah, I think it makes total sense. And I think to your point, frankly, it's no different than, the kind of changes in mental health for the officer themselves, where today agencies and chiefs actively, the culture is changing to get them to admit the stress, admit the impact, and be open and transparent about it. To your point, to provide that same visibility to the spouse, to the family. And it is what it is. It's and blocking away from it or hiding it or pretending it isn't there or trying to ignore it. It's not going away.
No, it's an infection that will grow. You have to treat it and we're not talking about treating symptoms. We're talking about eradicating the infection. The full communication, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm scared of, this is what I'm happy about, this is what I can manage, this is what I can't. And it's funny, earlier we were talking about, your bad day and cop's bad day. Every time I think I'm having a bad day now, I remind myself, nobody's going to try to shoot me or stab me today. So it's only going to be so bad. Yeah, I've had those days, so it can only be so bad.
Well, I am sad to bring this session to a close. But I'll finish with one last question for you, Frank. We try to do an honorarium in your name to say thank you for showing up on First Response. What cause or what organization can we donate in your name?
Are you familiar with concerns of police survivors, cops?
No. No. I'm definitely familiar with cops. Yes, I didn't.
They're a national organization that supports the surviving families of those officers killed in the line of duty, and anything you want to donate to them is appreciated.
Fantastic. That makes perfect sense. Well, folks, today it was a special day for me. Frank Borelli is he's a incredibly well respected and well listened to voice in policing, and is someone that you should follow. He is on officer.com. His ability to, and even today, his ability to, in simple language, explain the challenges that we face as a society, which is this misperception and stereotyping of police officers. And how that leads to confrontation and it leads to unnecessary escalation was helpful to and how how our children are raised and how we almost create the preconditions for conflict is something for me to take home and think about. That was one takeaway. The discussion around spouses and families, is the another huge takeaway, in that if it's hard enough for the police officer to deal with the mental challenges, just imagine how difficult it is for the spouse and the children, and the fear of the unknown, and how their mental well-being then affects the police officer, and then how he or she has to take that into work. And yet, if it was a big enough sacrifice to ask a police officer to put their line on the line for us to keep us safe, they're not putting their line on the line. They're putting their life and their life on the line. They're putting their entire family's mental health on the line every day by taking that badge and getting out on the streets. And they're putting their entire family at risk in a way that's, I think, we really don't appreciate and don't necessarily respect and understand. So again, when a police officer pulls you over, understand that they're a brother, mother, father, son, and they have families of which they have put at harm's way to keep us safe. And you might want to think about that when you roll the window down and respond to their request. So today was a fantastic session of First Response. This is the #1 podcast, and we do try to take you behind the badge, and hopefully we did that today to talk about what officers deal with. I hope you enjoyed it. I learned a lot. This podcast, and I do need to thank Pepperball. It's sponsored by the company where I work, Pepperball, where I am the CEO, and Pepperball creates non-lethal alternatives to guns that police use to keep themselves and the public they serve safe. That's our tagline. I hope you enjoyed it today. I hope you come back and listen again. And I hope that you stay safe out there. And the next time you see a police officer, you might want to thank them for their service. So have a great day.